And we're live.
Yay!
Hey, everybody. Hey, YouTube, BookTube, AuthorTube, whatever's your pleasure. Welcome to this evening's Black Friday entertainment, which is a buddy read discussion with Chrissy of The Return Carts. Hey, hello.
Hello, everyone.
And here we go. I took it down. There it is. We're going to be discussing Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. We each have different copies here. Mine, I only have 2 tabs. Chrissy's got hers like pimped out, if I may say the term. And we're just gonna roll through this. Anita's here to say hello.
Hello.
Thanks for stopping in, Anita. Roll through our experience with this book because it was quite an experience. Do you remember when you started reading this?
Oh gosh, I started reading it at the beginning of this year. Hold on,
I know, we're both gonna like look up our
look it up.
data systems here.
Which one was it? Pretty sure it was
October 16th.
Oh, I started reading a little bit after you. I think I just forgot to add it in because this is October 23rd, but I'm pretty sure I started before then.
Got it. So it's been a long haul. I think I finished about 10 days ago, and Chrissy finished
today, this morning. I had like 50 pages left. I was like, gotta get it.
It's what was 572. So I mean that's a lot.
Same page length.
What's that?
Same page length in the new editions too.
Cool. I'm glad that they did that. That's helpful.
Yeah.
So why did we decide to read this book? Do you remember over a month ago?
I had picked it up because I heard about it from, oh my gosh, what channel are they called? It's with Prometheus and
Book Zealots.
Yes, Book Zealots.
Arion.
And
yeah,
I heard Prometheus talking about it, and granted, I don't think he was that enthused about it, but I was like, I'm looking for a new sci-fi to pick up, and yeah, I can see why he wasn't as enthused, but I saw it in stores when I had some birthday money, so I picked it up, and then I did it in a haul.
Awesome. Cool. And I think I had gone into my local indie bookstore and seen that Kim Stanley Robinson, the author, had a newer book that was really interesting, Cli-Fi, New York City, underwater, kind of interesting premise, sorry. And then I was like, oh, but if I go back to his classic stuff, it'll be mass market copy, cheaper, and like give me a sense of his style. I'm glad I did that instead of buying the $20 book. So we're in classic sci-fi territory. We decided to pick this up. I'm glad I read it. I'm glad I tried him out and, looked at a 1992 version of Terraforming. We'll go into that a little bit. But before we do, I just wanted to introduce you as a channel. I've got, yay! I've got a special banner. So you're called The Return Cart on YouTube. So I put a little shopping cart on your any special story behind the name or why you have 2 different names on the different platforms?
Yeah, so when I first started YouTube, I actually had a different vision of what it was going to be because I started a podcast before called The Return Cart. And The Return Cart is actually more of a nod to library carts and returning books back to the shelves. So it's those library return carts that I named it after. And I had done a podcast with a couple of friends of mine. So we'd pick a book and then review it. And so my YouTube channel wasn't originally supposed to be like just me talking about books. And yeah, I had my website too. And it was
book blogging. So if anyone's interested, book reviews.
Yeah, and I haven't even updated that one, but please go and view it because some of the podcast stuff is still on there, and I like it. I liked a lot. My partner learned a lot about audio editing.
That's a good partner.
He's fantastic, and he keeps asking. He's like, "When are you doing the podcast again?" I'm like, "When people are in town, and we could meet again." But so I was originally just going to upload the podcast stuff onto YouTube, and that's why it's called The Return Cart. But my handle on Twitter was Lost in the Book BRB, and that's been my handle for pretty much every other social media.
Got it. which is cute.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought it was funny because when I was gathering information, I was like, oh, she's got to explain why she has two names because I'm Margaret Pernard, which is understandable. But I'm also Taste Life Twice on Twitter because that was the publishing company name that I chose. And so people are like, why? And I'm like, it's an Anais Nin quote. Okay, leave me alone. So there we go. All right. So we both got cluttered pasts, lots of references.
Yeah,
All
hopefully one day I'll actually like take the time to divvy it out, make a singular channel for the return cart, and then make one with my tag that I go with everything else.
Hey, maybe that'll happen when your friends come back and start reviewing books with you instead of having you just carry all the load.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Okay, so what's your star rating for this book? How much did you enjoy it? What are your general impressions?
I put it as middle of the road. So there's a lot of things that I did enjoy because I do like old sci-fi, and hard sci-fi too, some of the theories and just scientific backgrounds he puts up, I think are really good. Just how he does it is not my favorite because he goes into over explanations. So a lot of this book dragged for me where I didn't want it to. And then like as we get past the halfway mark, some of the things that he just puts in are just a little bit awkward and odd. And it just didn't flow very well. So a lot of good things that I liked in the beginning. Like the first half is probably my favorite part of this book, but second half I just wasn't as big of a fan. And I think the first half it was because there was a lot of the procedures that they did to get to Mars, and I liked that aspect of it. Still a little bit of a drag, still very slow, but I liked those aspects of it more than kind of when shit hits the fan in the last half of the book.
Yeah.
Because some of it was a little bit too much like, wait, what happened? Why that happened?
Right.
What about you? What was your star rating?
I think I gave it like 3.25, which is like average for me. It's like, it's not bad. It's a good book and some people will enjoy it for sure. But my level, it was just not for me. It's one of those books that like could be really good in someone else's hands, maybe someone who's a Trekkie and like has done a lot of this stuff and thought about it. But like you said, it dragged in parts and then it had an exciting bit and then it would drag again. And for me, it wasn't the first half versus second. It was more like you'd get a good 50 pages and then like a slow 70 and then a good 20 pages and then like a slow 40. And I'm just like, so that was sort of my experience with this book.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Okay. Lars is here. Hi, Lars.
Hi, Lars.
Oh, I read the entire trilogy, was a huge fan of the hard science content, but agree that some of his sociological commentary was not as strong. Interesting. Okay. Okay. We'll have to revisit that.
I agree with that, by the way. I do agree with that.
Okay. So one of the things that you mentioned about like the journey to get to Mars is something that some of the reviewers found they had issues with as well. And I mean, I liked the sort of stuff they had about the spaceship and the journey and the psychology and the stress. And you see that in a lot of space movies now. So we're more used to that. But then when they got to Mars and they were building stuff, yes, that's fine. But then they just sort of took all the food for granted. And every time they would mention it, I'd be like, and had to get pasta and had to get goats and, like, what? No, it was a little too like slipped right into normal life. And I think there was several layers of things. Like in normal fiction novels, I would appreciate lots of stuff about food or descriptions of food, but using that in the Mars context without explaining how you got there was weird to me. So
there was a few things about that because not only the food, but this might just be like TMI, I think, for some people when they read hard sci-fi or even hard fantasy, is like where they go to use the bathroom and showers and all those kind of aspects seemed a little bit too easy to get to. And if he did mention it, then it must have slipped me because I couldn't really find a place where he explained it in enough detail to give you a sense of what it would be like, because the one part he did do semi-decent was with gravity on Phobos, And I did like how he talked about that.
The train, yeah.
Yeah, the train, like, how do we get some gravity on here? And Nadia comes up with the train system. But then after that, we don't really get a sense of, well, how do people shower? How do the people, like, do all those necessities for themselves?
I don't think people did shower because water is such a scant resource until they get the mine and the flood and everything. So
well, and my thought was like, I wondered if he did ever think about that for this book, if they did it like they do in the International Space Stations, where it's just recycled water throughout, because that's the only way I could really think of it as being.
Right. Kind of like reclaimed is what they call it. Water reclamation. Here in California, and you're in
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque. So I mean, we're both in the same. I mean, I'm not in California now. I'm in Portland, Oregon, where they have plenty of water. But growing up in California, we're from the water reclaimed lands. Let me assure everybody.
Oh yes. Ours is a weird one because I know that New Mexico is in a Supreme Court case about water rights with Texas and another state. I forget. I read it a while ago and I can't remember nothing.
The Rio Grande River, maybe
I think so.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're in a fight with Texas.
Yes, there are fights over resources on Earth, and they come to be reflected up in Mars. How interesting! I just wanted to say hi to Colin. Thanks for stopping in.
Hi, Colin. 2 a.m. So yes, go to bed.
Yeah, we were on a live stream earlier today. So, all right. So impressions. Yeah. Let me just read. Here's one of the reviews I found on Goodreads, which I thought extremely well encapsulated my feelings. An extremely detailed and ridiculously well-researched novel on the colonization of Mars, this book is absolutely maddening. The characters veer from believable three-dimensional humans to weird caricatures and plot devices within a few pages. And the author's exploration of the political implications of a newly habitable planet filled with resources for civilization is at first fascinating and then just boring. At least 5 or 6 times, someone would yell out, "This isn't like the discovery of the new world on Earth. This is Mars." And occasional flashes of drama are intercut with some of the most boring passages I have ever read. I swear to God, at least a fifth of this book was just descriptions of people driving endless distances around Mars and writing about the landscape in flat prose. With a harsh editing job, this could have been a great book. As is, it's a lumbering Frankenstein monster with all the seams showing. And that is Jamie, who rated it 2 stars.
Well, good job on that review, because that's a
pretty good review.
That's very apt.
Yeah, I don't write long reviews like that anymore. It takes so much time, but
good. You should, Colin. And then tell us what you think.
And Colin writes horror, so I'm like, I mean, there's some horror there, but yeah, I'd be curious.
Yeah, I would like to hear what he has to say. But it's funny because that first line in that review, that it's so ridiculously well researched, is so true. And editing, like, I think a different editor would have been beneficial to this book, because what is it that there's like this phrase or this idea in writing is where you do all the work and then you hide it. You hide your work. But Kim Stanley Robinson is like, I'm hiding nothing. I will put all of it on the page. If I researched, it's going in here.
Totally. Here, I'll give a little example. So page 205. Genetically engineered microorganisms, or GEMs, had been on the scene only about half a century when the first 100 arrived on Mars. But half a century in modern science is a long time. Plasmid conjugates had become very sophisticated tools in those years. The array of restriction enzymes for cutting and ligase enzymes for pasting was big and versatile. The ability to line out long DNA strings precisely was there. The accumulated knowledge of genomes was immense and growing exponentially. And used all together, this new biotechnology was allowing all kinds of trait mobilization, promotion, replication, triggered suicide to stop excess, success, and so forth. And that's just like 3 lines of a whole page of all this nonsense where I'm just reading this, and there's a collection of nouns that I can sort of read 80% of and just not understand what they're talking about. And I'm like, okay, keep going. I don't know if you're right, but it's not helping like paint the world for me, because I don't know what any of this means. So that was the frustrating part.
Yes. Let me see if I can find it real quick, because I have all these tabs. My apologies. I'm trying to see if I can find the one that I...
Themes. Yeah.
if I could find the one that I showed my partner, because and if I can't, then I can. But there was a point in the book where they talk about permafrost, and it's towards the end, because they were blowing, like there was a group blowing up like the moleholes or something like that.
Oh, tell me if I need to put a spoiler in here, because I have a banner for that.
Oh, sorry. Spoilers.
Okay, what are they blowing up? The moleholes. Oh, the big
they're blowing up. And granted, I don't actually think that's probably much of a spoiler. There's a lot that happens.
No,
but,
yeah, it's true.
But so something was being blown up, and how they described it was like different pressures happening. So pressure from above and then pressure from below. But how they did it was in this really weird scientific framework. And I'm so mad at myself that I didn't put a tabby for that, because it was a perfect example of like no one actually talks that way.
Yeah.
And because and I was telling you before the stream, I read that part to my husband, and I was like, I don't know what they're saying here. I don't know what they're explaining. And he explained it to me, and he was like, but that's odd that they put that in, because no scientist talks like that I've worked with. And I was like,
not even a scientist. Okay.
Yeah. At least not when you're explaining things, I think, because I think maybe if you're talking with someone on the same level, and most of them are on that level, but at the same time, I think even then you're probably not going to talk like that.
Right. Okay. All right, then what about some of the other aspects of this novel? So when I looked up on Wikipedia to see about like themes that people had opined about, they called this a utopian rather than a dystopian novel. And I'm not too clear on the difference between these, but when I think of dystopian, what's very popular now, it's like a great crisis has happened and civilization basically has to start over, right? And so I think what they're getting at is that this is the population of Earth very hopefully trying to expand, but really they're like running away from the problems they can't solve. But there hasn't been a crisis that has reset everybody. And that sort of makes sense to me. Does that sound right to you?
I would not necessarily I don't know if they're classifying this as a utopian hard sci-fi, or if they're just saying like the theme is utopian in its essence. And I think I think that is, but I think it's like utopian, but why utopians fail often, and how they fail. So yeah, that's pretty apt. That's pretty accurate.
Okay. And then some of the major themes, which I was like, yes, okay. Corporate control. So like we haven't seen this and it isn't reality. It's not sci-fi at all, but MNCs, I studied economics. So like I have multinational corporations in my head, but they call them transnational corporations in this, and they shorten them as transnats. And they've basically taken over the world. They're bigger than most countries. And excuse me.
Sorry, that's my son. He's still up.
And they're taking over.
Every now and then you'll hear a squeal from a tiny tot. He's almost 2, so yeah.
Aw. Cool. So yeah, we see this. I don't know if this is a spoiler either, but basically when we start out, it's about the journey and the science and the hopefulness, and then we get more into like history repeating itself with Earth's troubles chasing all the people who have come to Mars to colonize. And so the monopolies and the greed and corruption of Earth is catching up. And that's not a spoiler. It's just sort of like a main, here we are, we can't escape it. I don't know. It's not very hopeful. What's your take on that?
That's introduced like in the first 100 pages. The idea of not so much corporations, but governments trying to take over certain aspects of it, and resources and money kind of coming into it. So then that's how corporations kind of slip in. As far as that part goes, I think Kim Stanley Robinson has a pretty good pulse on what would happen if we ever did manage to fully colonize another planet. I think you would see probably loads of governments trying to stake claim on different places, and also corporations trying to figure out ways to garner those resources to to utilize for whatever. So I think that's pretty apt. It's sad, but very apt.
I don't remember, what do they call the small countries that were like friendly flag or something, that like the companies would just say, oh, we're coming in as Trinidad, but like really we're bigger than Trinidad and we're holding a gun to them so that they do what we say.
Yeah.
So yeah. No parallels in real life there.
No. Though that does bring me to point out that if people do pick up this book, to realize that it was written in the 90s, or a little bit
92.
before the 90s. Yeah. So probably written in the late 80s, early 90s. So most of this is like political atmosphere of that time frame. And granted, some of it is still pretty relevant to today, but some of it is a little bit outdated in how he talks about it, because when he first mentions like Arabic countries, I was just like, that's an odd way to start phrasing it, but okay.
Just like the terminology.
Yeah.
Some of that is outdated, but we're changing so quickly these days with like political correctness and everything.
Like, no, so it's more just like, to be aware when you pick this book up. It's not anything like, I think he does a really good job of representing different cultures. He may not do the greatest job with like people interacting with each other all the time, but he does do a good job, I think, of explaining some of the differences culturally, like some of the Russian culture versus American culture versus others that happen too.
Yeah. I thought so. The piece in the review is that you get really well-drawn characters in a few pages, and then the next thing you get like a sort of caricature. And especially for Frank, I found that hard to swallow. He's such a complex character, but in some instances, you're just like, what the hell? Like, wait, duh. So,
I gotta say, I was disappointed when I got to his chapter. So how the chapters are laid out is they'll focus on one central character. And when we got to Frank, I was a little bit disappointed with how he decided to fully portray Frank, because I thought he was gonna be deeper than he was, if that makes sense. Like,
yeah. I mean, we have the interesting part where he goes into the desert and he kind of like zones out and goes off grid. And I'm like, okay, he's finding himself. This is his like longevity midlife crisis, I guess. But
I think I just like, he just turned out to be such an angry man. I was like,
yeah.
Like, understandably, for some of the things that he goes through and the things that are happening. But at the same time, I was just like, he kind of just became anger personified. And I was just like, interesting.
Yeah. The scenes where he's like trying to come to political compromises and he's on his devices all the time. And I'm like, okay, this is definitely still works in this time period, because people would be attached to things and trying to communicate. Yeah, I mean, he has a vision, but yeah. The love triangle is like one of the hardest things for me to get around. Okay.
Yes.
Love triangle ahead. Like really pitiable love triangle.
Yes.
I just wanted to put this up here. I don't agree with this exactly. Utopian is a happy future. Dystopian is where the future has gone to crap. Because I think what we're describing this book as like why utopias fail means that when you categorize the book, if you say, is it one or the other, it's closer to a utopian, but it's not a happy future, because it's trying to show what happens in a utopian experiment, you know?
Yeah. And I'm more in agreement with you that I think when I think of dystopian, I think things have already gone to heck and back, and now we're dealing with that aftermath.
Right.
Whereas utopian, in the case of this book, is like, okay, things are going really well, but now all these other factors are coming in to make it not go well.
Yeah. So you mentioned that it's written or published in the 90s and written earlier, and the fact that you have lots of cultures represented but not necessarily centered, because the main two are the American representatives and the Russian representatives who have to get along, right? And that is pretty interesting. 92 is when the USSR crumbled. So like he wouldn't have been able to put any of that in there, sociologically speaking. Excuse me. Utopia has to fail in a book or there's no conflict. Right.
Yeah.
That's why Utopia is in a book.
Yeah. That's why if there is a utopian society, it's more like nodded in books rather than as a central theme or as a central point in a book.
Right. Okay. So the 90s in the USSR and the portrayal of different characters. Where was it going with that? Help.
So he couldn't necessarily talk. Well, he could talk about the USSR. It just wasn't relevant in the late 80s, early 90s, especially since he set this book at this time frame. Where are we going? Like, we're going to Mars, so I guess he was pretty on the dot.
Like 5 years. Yeah. Well, and here's what I was going to bring up is that I just saw someone on TikTok. Do you follow Trashling?
I don't know.
She's really funny. She's Russian, but she's from Ireland.
Okay.
From one of the Russian satellites. I'm not sure. Anyway, she was describing, I think it was her, describing the difference between Dune when it was filmed last and it was the Cold War versus Dune now when it's after the war in Afghanistan and all this stuff. And how it was just, it's the same plot, but it's a completely different commentary. And that's why I'm like thinking about this is so interesting because, okay, if you just had the USSR collapse and your book is about how these two entities of world politics are working together in a different environment. How does that change when you're viewing it now when we're, I don't know, descending into chaos? I don't really know what we have right now. America gone wrong. I don't know.
I don't know, because I think with this book, like, I actually think, with exception of some of the language stuff that we already talked about, it's actually aged pretty well in how he portrays different countries and how countries would interact with each other. But yeah, I don't know. I would love to see what his thoughts would be today if he rewrote Red Mars to fit into today's kind of commentary. I think there would be some differences. I think instead of having government send people out, it'd be corporations sending people out, because that's what's happening now.
Well, I mean, and it is, right? So if I put up the spoiler thing, because this might be a spoiler, if we talk about the end where they have what's the big long ladder? The elevator?
Oh, the elevator, yeah.
Which I was like, it's like a slingshot to get out of the gravity or something. Okay, whatever. If you have that and it's going to be the treaty renegotiated and like basically they're loading as many people up there as they can because they can get money for it, and then they're using it as a launch pad for other places. Like that's all the corporations making the money and trying to offload people. I guess I need to think more about how the small countries are faring back on Earth, or read the rest of the series, which I'm not going to do. But.
I probably actually will. I'm thinking of picking up Green Mars and maybe reading the rest of it. But I'm probably gonna pause on that for a bit, give myself a break.
Should I send you my copy of Green Mars that I accidentally bought? Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. Like I honestly think that with if this book was written today, the biggest change would just be who's sending who up to Mars. And so I don't think it necessarily be countries sending up. I think it'd be corporations. So it wouldn't necessarily be like the flag of a different country or the like governments trying to offload people. I think it would be a little bit more elitist than that in the initial, or even further on. So that's what I think.
Well, they would have to wait until they had enough minions up there to do all the dirty work, right? Because that's why they're setting them up, because they're mining and they're construction, and so they're sending people to do that.
Yeah.
No protections that are getting broken into by the police and the secret forces.
Oh yeah.
So
yeah, actually,
in Green Mars.
See what else happens,
right? Charles is here, so we'll say hello, Charles. He's commenting on the fact that Sting went up in Dune. I think the earlier Dune. So
yeah, I haven't watched the earlier Dune. I've read the book and I've watched the new Dune, but I've only seen clips of the old Dune, so I'm a little bit skeptical.
Okay, yeah, same here. Let's see. We also talk about the theme of genetic engineering in our Wikipedia thing. So that touches a little bit on the science that we were talking about. They call it terraforming. And there's two poles represented by characters in this book. There's Anne, who is like observe it in nature before we change things because the observer is going to change things, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Saxifrage, who's the person
Mm-hmm.
who wants to change everything to make it like human ready, like
Mm-hmm. Well,
like
we have
the glamper on Mars, right?
Yeah, we have a couple of different, because there's Anne, there's also Sax, and then there's Phyllis, who
Oh, the financial side. Yeah.
financial side, and then you have Arcady, who
Mhm.
is like anarchy, and
Right.
and then you have Maya, who's just trying to be like, follow what the government say.
Yeah. So I feel like those are on a spectrum in between, with Anne and
Mm-hmm.
Sax as the two poles that are set
Yeah.
up in terms of the science of it. We have politics and
Mm-hmm.
money in between, sort of muddling, but those are
Yeah.
the two, like, science poles. So this is one of the things that I had like done a little bit of research on in terms of climate change policy and geoengineering. And so when they were talking about terraforming, they using
Mhm.
that term and talking about how they were terraforming Earth, meaning they were trying to make Mars more like Terra, like Earth, so it was habitable by changing all these moisture and like nitrogen content and
And setting up
temperature.
a denser atmosphere. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Like, I liked the idea, and I liked the fight and the discussions and debates. I didn't need all the science. That's fine. It's fine. It's fine.
As said, Kim Stanley Robinson is like, I looked it up. You're gonna read it.
I know. But did that make an impression on you? Did it seem like related to stuff you've heard of, or like not register?
Yes. What a lot of the science that he talks about, I had heard before through talks of people talking about the colonization of Mars, how that would be done if people ever did. I live with a nerd who talks about things a lot.
Okay. All right.
And his friends also talk about these things. Like, they talk about orbital mechanics. I don't.
Orbital?
Yeah. So
like
orbital calculations and orbital mechanics, and like the mathematics it takes to figure out how to get into orbit and leave orbit. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I know nothing, but some of the concepts that he introduces, like, you might want to put up a spoiler alert, because I'm not quite sure if this is a spoiler, but one of the aspects of terraforming that they talk about is pretty much having a bunch of things hit Mars, like a bunch of, like, I don't know if it's asteroids, but pretty much having big rocks hit Mars so that all the dust flies up, and so that atmosphere can kind of start to develop. So pretty much simulating the asteroid that hits, like, Earth to make Earth's atmosphere. So pretty much that concept of it. I thought that was fascinating. I'm with you that I didn't necessarily need all the science in it. Like, he could have put that down into one paragraph and said like 10 pages, but I did like that he put that concept in there, because I think it's a pretty well-known one as far as, like, if you're into sciences and especially other planets.
Agree. Here's another example of the stuff where my brain just sort of like glazed over. So this is page 303. The miners were real Azanians this time, but Azanians who called themselves Afrikaners and spoke Afrikaner among themselves. White men who welcomed John with heavy doses of God, Volk, and Trek. They had named the canyons they worked in Nove Orange Free State and Nove Pretoria, and they, like the miners at Bradbury Point, worked for Arms Corps. We found iron, copper, silver, manganese, aluminum, gold, platinum, titanium, chromium, you name it. Sulfides, oxides, silicates, native metals, you name it. The Great Escarpment has them all. And we got treated to like a whole topographical tour of this planet. And I was like, okay, I like geography as much as the next person, but I don't know if this is real or not. And if it's not real, like, I don't need to keep this in my head. I don't even keep this in my head if it is real. Yeah. So anyway, all the metals and stuff, like the lists.
Well, and can I show something that's in the books? And I don't know if it's in your copies, but this is some of the stuff that you can find in this freaking book. It is pretty much calculations for the Mars calendar and how you figure out what day it is on Mars. And he explains this. Let me see. There's an explanation from page 120 to 122, kind of, because it starts talking a little bit about it. But it's like 2 pages worth of talking about it. Just calculations are thrown in there. Like, I was like, I did not know there's math involved in all of this.
It's like people discussing the Julian and the Gregorian calendars. Like, yes, we know they exist. Do we have to calculate what's what? Really?
Well, and it's not just math either. It's also psychological components. So Michael has this whole graph on psychological issues. And I'm just like, what? Like, I know some of it just because I'm going to school for it, but hot dang. Like,
yeah. You're like, who asked you?
Yeah, like, what? Shut up, Michael.
Oh, man. I did actually enjoy the Michel Duval, the French person who was like the psychology, the only one. Like the only... Yeah.
Oh, sorry, I've been calling them Michael. Is it Michel?
Yeah, he's a French dude. So
yeah. Okay.
The one
sorry,
out of
Michel.
And then I missed him when he disappeared because I was like, oh, I want to see what happened to him because he had like a really interesting. Oh, wait. Let me put this. He had a really interesting cliffhanger near the beginning, which is that he just walked out and disappeared, and you didn't hear from him. And you hear about that with Hiroko, and you know they're gonna come back, but you don't know if he's gonna come back because he seems like such a loner and such a weirdo. You're like, I miss him.
And also it brings up a really interesting thing. Interesting thought process of mental health in space, because he's the only one for 100 people, and he talks about his own psychiatrist and his own like therapist, and he's like, but they're on Earth, so I can't really.
So you're dealing with like minutes of latency, like
very asynchronous sessions, and I was like, that's actually pretty true. Like he's pretty much carrying mental burdens for everyone else, and then not having someone to kind of help him process that stuff. So I could see why he kind of got into the mindset that he did.
Yeah, totally. I thought they were very unique. When you think about authors crafting characters, and they, sometimes they'll blend together or sort of be not too consistent. I thought that these were very clearly different characters. They said very different things. They had very different worldviews, and I could see that and appreciated it.
Yes, Michelle definitely, I thought, had that. I liked that a lot. I liked how he did that.
So we were both disappointed with Frank. Did we have a favorite character? I really liked being in Nadia's head. How about you?
Nadia was probably my favorite, but I actually liked Arcady. Like, I was unsure of him when he was first introduced, because he was just like, who cares about anyone else? Like, let's just do what we want. And I was like,
right.
Oh, yeah. Mister, like, let's not. But then
side-eye at the beginning for sure. Yeah.
But then he ends up being, I think, charismatic, and I think because of how Arcady is presented in the book, like, he doesn't get as much of a spotlight as the other characters who are introduced.
Right.
I think because of that, then we get to still have this kind of enigma, and I kind of like that we didn't know as much about him as like some of the other characters, that we still had some mystery to him throughout.
Yeah, so when we first see him, it's from Maya's point of view, and she's like, why are you screwing all this up for me, introducing chaos element in my political, field? And so you're frustrated with him because he seems like a wacko, but then as you go on, like, you see him from Nadia, and Nadia actually likes him and develops a relationship with him. So then you're like, oh, well, he seems like more of a free spirit rather than like just a troublemaker. So yeah, the POV and the switching for like 8 different people or however many it is really helped, I think, in that case.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. So I actually liked Arcady. Disappointed with Frank. I did not care for John. He just...
We gotta talk about John! Yes. Okay. Spoiler alert is back up. Okay, so structure. Can we talk about John with the structure?
So the structure of how his story goes?
Yeah. So, like, okay, there's character POVs as the story goes along. There's weird interludes that are sort of like backed up, kind of what's it called?
A little bit more omnipotent than.
Yes, thank you. I was
than
thinking
the.
ubiquitous. I was like, no. Omnipotent viewpoint. But then there's also like the scene that are sort of cut and pasted. At the beginning, we have the scene where the city's already mapped out and there's a big speech and like something happens and John Boone gets hurt. And John Boone is like the John Wayne sort of hero from the earlier age who's trying to bring everyone together. And you don't realize what's happening till toward the end where it's like an assassination attempt. And you're like, oh, but it's like 400 pages later. This is like a month later in reading time. So,
yeah. Well, I actually thought this was going to end with the assassination scene.
Okay.
And then it went on for like 200 more pages, and I was like, what is this like? So, like, I thought it was just going to be like, okay, so we're flashing back and then explain all that happens to here and then the subsequent books, but then it didn't do that. But yeah, his storyline was a little bit odd, and I think my problem with his storyline is because we got to know him really well in his chapter, we got to kind of see his downfall before the assassination attempt. So like, I almost feel like we could have done without the assassination attempt and his downfall would have just been purely himself, which I think would have been more impactful than someone looking to kill him. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean. So I think it's more tragic and has more pathos if you see his sort of learning, discovering how he's going to be useful to the community, trying to knit everyone together at the time of crisis, and then like someone cutting him off from that because their greed or corruption or whatever, rather than having the back end view behind stage of someone like plotting and maneuvering another culture, which is, questionable.
Yeah. Well, and also just some of the things that John was going through, like he ends up taking that medication to kind of help stay the same
everyone
was taking it, but it seemed like it affected him in a way that was like an addict. And that's how I was reading it, because his personality kind of changes after he starts taking it. And that's just something that I thought of. Like, I was like, like I don't know if it's the planet. I don't know if it's his isolation. I don't know if it's, all the changes that are happening are because he's taking the substance and there's like a side effect to it. But it seemed correlated at the time. But I don't know. I just think that there's like a little bit of a character shift that if it's not the medication, that was a little bit left unexplained of why.
Okay. I think I took that as more of a POV shift. Like when we were in his viewpoint, things looked a certain way. And then from someone else's viewpoint, they were frustrated with him. And then when we go back, it's more like he's the hero again. But
I think that makes sense.
A closer reading would probably yield more specific results.
There might have been stuff in there. Admittedly, some of the, I will admit, I don't tend to skim very often, but some of the parts I skimmed because I was just like, I can't with you.
Manganese, silica, lignite, like just enough. Like I don't need to know.
Done.
And I was one of the nerds who like memorized the periodic table, so you're not even getting through to me,
Yeah.
Okay. The final theme that was noted was longevity. I don't think that really comes into play too much in this book. I think it's probably like the consequences sort of catch up with them in later books, but they do develop a thing for people to get a treatment where they can live longer, which probably enables some of the same characters to carry over. But I didn't feel like it really impacted this book. What do you think?
Yeah, with this book, like he does mention ages and dates, but it doesn't really feel like it has much of an impact. I think at one point, who was it? I think Anne states like, even though I'm taking this pill, I still feel old because I'm old. And I think that's the most that we get out of that.
You get generational conflict at the end.
Yes. Yeah. So like I think just based on how the pacing goes, like it's this weird where there's a lot of time that passes, but because it's so slow pacing that I'm kind of almost incredulous that time has passed that much. Like, what do you mean 50 years have passed? I don't even know if it's 50.
It feels like 50 years reading this book. No,
yeah. I'm just like, I feel like he's only describing the past year just very longly.
Yeah.
But but so much time has passed.
There is a lot of time that passes in this. Yeah, he did a good job reminding us that like how many years, how many LSs or whatever Mars years are. And I still, I don't know, maybe this is just the kind of reader I am, but I still didn't have an idea of whether a Mars year was shorter or longer than an Earth year, and I didn't care. Like, it was just like, whatever, you're there for a while and you're giving us seasons. Like, this is fine. Go on.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. But I did like the generational stuff at the end, the way that some of the characters who we'd been with for a while would check in with different settlements and like not be able to relate to the new refugees or the kids that they didn't know about at the beginning.
Yeah. Yeah.
On that note, there was a funny tweet that Roxanne Gay put out, which is, I think about Thanksgiving. My nephew said his favorite oldies band was Blink 182, and I told him to get out of the house.
Right?
So I thought I'd share that with my age friends.
I was with my nieces and nephews when I was in Philadelphia, and granted, they're like 18, 19, and I just felt so old. I was like, I'm not even that old, but oh, you guys make me feel like my knees are hurting. Like,
yeah. Okay, so I think we are entering into the time period where we can tease out different little quotes. So if you have tabs that you want to highlight, I'm going to start with something that made me laugh, which was page 297, and it's actually, I think it's Frank. Is it Frank?
Mm-hmm.
John. Frank? Who am I talking about? Who is this? I think it's John.
Are you?
Anyway, that's a large part of what economics is. People arbitrarily, or as a matter of taste, assigning numerical values to non-numerical things, and then pretending that they haven't just made the numbers up, which they have. Economics is like astrology in that sense, except that economics serves to justify the current power structure, and so it has a lot of fervent believers among the powerful. And I was like, thank you for tying this right back into labor and capital in the Gilded Age. So I was particularly tickled by that that definition that he put in this book. So yeah, thank you, Kim, for that.
One that I have is on page 62, and it's when they're talking about the personality test that they had to take before being approved to go on this trip, and Katie admits that he lied like a mofo. And he's telling everyone else that he lied, but this is about explaining what personality test that he used. So Sachs wore his usual Buster Keaton, but he raised a finger and said the revised Minnesota multifaceted personality inventory and a great jeer went up from them all. They had all been required to take this exam. It was the world's most widely used psychological test, not anymore, and well regarded by experts. Respondents agreed or disagreed to 556 statements, and a profile was formed from the replies, but the judgments concerning what the answers meant were based on the earlier responses of a sample group of 2,600 white married middle-class Minnesota farmers of the 1930s. Despite all subsequent revisions, the pervading bias created by the nature of that first test group was still deeply ingrained in the test, or at least some of them thought so. This is one where I'm like, it makes sense why he put it in there, because it explains how exactly they lied and fudged the test, because it talks about norming stuff, but it's on such this deep level that it doesn't really do as much for the stories I think he thinks it does. So it's something that tickled my fancy because I'm studying that stuff, and I was like, oh, he's talking about norming data and how all this kind of stuff goes into it, and I think that's fascinating. But I was like, just thinking about like someone who may not find that nearly as fascinating, it might be a little bit dragging in that part. But I do want to say I think that's like an applaud to Kim Stanley Robinson for doing his research, because we're
getting to some positive comments. Yeah. There we go.
Well, because I was like, that's an interesting thing to go into, because the Minnesota multiphasic personality test was a really regarded thing during its time. Nowadays, it's the Myers-Briggs personality test that gets kind of the most spotlight. And then there's subsequent ones that come off of that as well. And the Myers-Briggs really it comes from Jung, his personality test that he did. So.
Oh, okay.
I forget what his is called, but I had to take it. It's the Jungian personality test, something, something, something. And it uses the same codes that the Myers-Briggs one does, but I think Myers-Briggs changed up the questioning in order to get the results.
What about the Enneagram? Have you taken that one?
I don't think I've taken that one.
Okay. I remember getting into that when I was younger. So
no, when I took a whole class on assessments and testing, and that's why I laughed when I got to that part. I was like, I know about this.
Yeah.
And it stuck with the Minnesota multiphasic. They talked a little bit about that one, and then Jung's was the biggest one that they talked about. And there's like Myers-Briggs and this website called 16 Personalities, which is all based around Jung's theories.
Oh, okay. Very cool. Very cool. So he had to know a lot of different sciences to put this together and bore us all in different points.
Really did. I do have one that I did like that he put in, because I thought that it kind of set a tone for some of the space things in it, and it's on page 55. And it's when they're going through all those tests to see if they can get through an emergency. So Arcady just keeps throwing at them like these emergency tests, and then they realize that one is not a test; it's an actual emergency. So emergencies in space can be as obvious as an explosion or as intangible as an equation, but their obviousness has nothing to do with how dangerous they are. I just really liked that line. I was like, sets that scene. I like it.
And that's a whole, like, that could be a whole new point of takeoff for, like, considering reality and how we deal with reality now, because obviousness is an interesting concept in today's divided society. I'll just leave it there.
Yeah.
So I have another one, page 367, which made me laugh again. So this is when you think about colonizing another planet and like exporting culture, but many different cultures, and are they going to homogenize? The answer is no for this book, but we've got language and idiom culture that will have to evolve. So let's see. So John's refusing this drug because he doesn't need it to feel happy at the moment. He says it'd be carrying coals to Newcastle at this point. Really, it would. Carrying coals to Newcastle? He means it'd be like taking permafrost to Borealis, or pumping more CO2 into the atmosphere, bringing lava to Olympus, putting more salt in the goddamn soil, putting any more ferric oxide anywhere on the whole damn planet. Exactly, John said, laughing. I'm already full red. So it's just kind of funny that you get all these like similar idioms that now pertain to the new culture and landscape. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that was cool, because when I say carrying coals to Newcastle, no one knows what I mean either. So
all those little idiosyncrasies. I like it. I have one that this is about John, and I just liked how he phrased this, because it really gave you an insight into John's character when he's trying to get everyone together.
Yeah.
So he goes.
It's the same one. I have one similar. So which one is it?
It's on 252. It says, "We all want different things from Mars," he said, forgetting that he had just said the opposite to Anne on the Hill. And I was just like, yeah, that's pretty good to put in there, because he is trying so hard to get everyone together, but in doing so, he's kind of lying, or at the very least, fudging things to different people to get what he wants.
Did you think that was his beginning personality or his ending when you say you thought he changed?
I thought that was his beginning personality. So, because when they're starting, you get a lot of hints dropped, and like Arcady gives some hint drops, and so does Maya, that John is really this just peacekeeper guy, but he does it in a way of kind of placating other people. So he'll say things just to kind of get people to kind of simmer down, instead of saying what he actually believes to be true.
Yeah, I got a much simplified version of him from other people. And then when we're in his head, I think you got a lot more of like he's scheming. He's just making it look easy. And I was like, oh, okay, I see.
Yeah.
And speaking of obviousness and reality, my last little bit that I'm going to highlight is, I think, for 48. So there's a piece earlier on when they're in the ship on the way to Mars where they're talking about ripping, because they're trying to, give themselves some sense of gravity so they don't feel sick.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the very end, they have the same habitat, but it's with Phyllis in the elevator. So I don't know if I need to put spoiler up for this, but whatever. This is when Frank is talking to Phyllis, and that got her attention, no doubt about it. Her easy contempt took on a sudden edge. No single person can convince Washington of anything. It's quicksand down there. You'll have your say and I'll have mine, and we'll see who has more influence. And she ripped across the room and opened the door and loudly welcomed a gang of UN officials. So the rip refers to, in case that wasn't clear, refers to Velcro on the shoes and on the floor, so that they can walk and stay on the floor instead of like floating around in less than regular gravity. And so just having that like not verbal, oral, like sound sensory thing of like that feels so jagged as well as like another intrusion on reality that I thought was really well placed to bring in again at the end with Phyllis.
I like that. Yeah. That was a good one.
Yeah. Any last, I think I have some more negative things or questions. I have a couple questions, which we do in the last.
Oh yeah, go for it. Questions.
Like things I wasn't sure on. So, so the interludes.
Yeah, the interludes.
And like the big man and Paul Bunyan, like what was that whole thing? It was like a myth that they were taking from Earth and then like making it apply to some weird thing that I wasn't sure if it was real on Mars. Did that make sense to you?
Yeah, it looked like, so there's a couple of different times that they brought up myths and they were putting into Mars, and one of them was actually it's a pretty it reminds me of a short story read by Emily Maw, and she talked about the Coyote on Mars. And they bring up this character called the Coyote, and at first you don't know whether or not he's a person.
In Red Mars or in the short story?
Both. So in the short stories, it's the legend of in native cultures of the Coyote, and he's on Mars. But so I think it's based off of a native legend that goes in, and so but in Red Mars, they bring up Coyote, and you don't know whether or not he's a character or if he's a myth. And so then when they bring in like Paul Bunyan later on, I kind of thought maybe they're just like starting to connect these different legends with Mars and leave it at that, because I don't think that there's any actual stories of Paul Bunyan on Mars.
No. Okay, well, here's another question then. When did you know that the Coyote was real? Sorry.
Spoiler.
When did you know the Coyote is real? Because like we first hear about the Coyote as a stowaway on the ship on the way, so very early on, but through Maya's point of view, and we don't know if she's hallucinating because she's under stress or not.
Well, I had a feeling that if he was real, it was going to be the guy who was stowing away, but I didn't know he was real until John knew he was real, and someone just said that he's an actual person because John had questions on whether or not the Coyote was real.
Right,
or not.
He was going around asking people about it, trying to track it down.
Yeah, and so I didn't know either. I didn't know, and there's a minute I thought the Coyote was Hiroko. I thought that she was Coyote, but
yeah, I think I'm not sure what made me think it, but I think I got Coyote and Stowaway correlated pretty quickly after we were in the second or third POV. I don't know why. I guess I wanted to believe it was a person instead of a.
I leaned more towards it being a person, but for a minute I thought it was probably Hiroko or someone connected with Hiroko, and so that's.
Hey, little coyote.
I know, my own coyote.
Yeah. Okay.
Singing in the distance.
Yes, exactly. Howling. So anyway, the Paul Bunyan thing. I just think it wasn't like grounded. It was one of those interludes. There's one at the beginning and one near the end, and I'm like, I don't see how the omnipotent view is giving us more understanding.
Yeah, no, those interludes were like the first couple of ones made sense, but then after that, it kind of some of them go a little bit off the rails. The Paul Bunyan one is definitely one that
Okay.
I wasn't sure where he was going with it.
Okay, good. I'm not alone.
No, you're not.
And then let's see, okay, this is another spoiler alert, so I'll leave this up. Last question I had was about a specific moment with Anne and Sax at the end when they find each other and they're safe. Page 555. After the big huge flood has been averted and they're at the South Pole. Do you think Phobos broke it open? Maybe more likely a reactor meltdown. Did you know Compton was this big? Sax asked. Yes. I never heard of it. No. And stared at him. Had he heard her say that? He had. Concealing data. He was shocked. She could tell. He couldn't imagine any reason good enough to conceal data. Perhaps this was the root of their inability to understand each other. Value systems based on entirely different assumptions, completely different kinds of science. Then they go on to like try to figure out where to go from there. But my question is like, this is a crisis point that is like the meeting of the two poles that we've had to orient ourselves throughout the whole book, but I'm not sure what to bring away from it. They have different kinds of science. Is there a rapprochement at the end? Are they getting along because they're the only survivors? Like, how did that moment hit you, or what can you help me?
Well, because I'm trying to remember, this was one of those ones where I was like, I wish this book was a little bit faster paced because I couldn't remember. Sax and Anne had a relationship, right?
No.
In the beginning? I could have sworn that they did.
Maybe like a brief one?
Yeah, because then she has a child with Simon, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think because I'm pretty sure they had like a relationship at the very, very beginning. And it kind of felt like they were playing at that relationship in the beginning. But I couldn't remember. And so I was like, maybe.
Okay.
Maybe. But I had, like, admittedly towards the end, I had a hard time kind of connecting the dots that Kim Stanley Robinson was kind of putting out there because it was slow going, and then he has a lot of things happen very quickly, and some of them just aren't explained in a way that is for the layman to kind of understand.
Yeah, it's like the constellations that are connecting dots, but it's taking light years to get to us.
Yes. So I'm not quite sure. Like I felt like they were pulling on the connection that they once had as the original 100 people that first came on. So it's kind of like those feelings mixed with their two ideologies clashing and how they go in. Because at one point he also is like, on that same page, he's like, I wouldn't have done it this way. And Anne's like, okay. Just a little
whatever, dude.
Yeah.
You did do it this way. You were responsible for most everything that has happened.
Yeah, and all she says is, "I know." It's just kind of like,
yeah, they're weird. They're too far out for me to understand. He just like blinks and stares at a screen, and she's just like always angry and can't talk to anyone. I'm like, guys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, both of them are. I think what that one reviewer was talking about, caricatures of certain types, like Sax kind of embodies that full science person going in, and Anne does to an extent, but more on that angry side, like environmentalists rather than science.
Well, environmentalists are scientists too. They're two scientists. They're two poles of scientists. Like one is observe and don't mess with it, and one is, ooh, look at all the crap we can do because we can control nature. Yes. I wonder which side I'm on. No biases here.
Freaking Sax.
Yeah.
I didn't like his character very much.
What's that?
I didn't like his character very much. I actually think that Kim Stanley Robinson didn't really make him very very sympathetic. Yeah. He just wasn't.
Interesting. Did you have any questions that came up that you were like, I have no idea what this is about, that you wanted to point to? Or
maybe you can help me because I just couldn't remember. Who's Peter?
Peter.
Is Peter Anne's son?
Oh yes, Hold on.
Sorry, spoilers, guys, all over the place.
Peter is the son that they have who ends up at the top of the elevator, and like she's thinking that he's died because he can't get back, and then he's picked up in space.
Yes. Yes, he is. I when we first meet him, he's like this toddler in Anne's lap.
Oh, I
And
don't
he's
even
like,
remember him as a
yeah,
toddler.
I actually thought that was a really cute scene because he's in her lap and she's like explaining something and he keeps repeating like the last few things that she says. And I was like, oh, that's adorable.
Oh.
But then, like I said, a lot of time passes and we get to see him when he's older and on the space elevator. And for a while, I couldn't remember who he was because I forgot that much time passed. I was like, who the hell is this? Like, why do I care about Peter?
Yeah. We don't really. That's the problem.
We don't.
And on that note, do you have anything coming up on your channel or in your book review blog that you wanted to point out? I don't.
I don't really. I'm gonna be posting again soon because I just finished my semester, or it's finishing up, and so my time is a little bit given back to me from my classes. So I'm hoping to start posting more reviews and all that. Like, I am on TikTok. It's not quality, but it's there.
It's there. Oh, tell us about your indie author project, which is super cool that you're going to bring onto YouTube.
So one of the things that I just really have a feel for people trying to market their own stuff because I think that's really hard. And when I first joined in on oh, thank you.
Such as Anita. She's an indie author too.
Yes, I'll write down the name.
Yes.
So when I first started into online communities for books, I know like there's a lot of people who will reach out to be like, hey, can you review my book for what have you? And I would feel bad because like either I just wasn't interested in reading it at that time, or I just was at a point in my life where I just wasn't reading a lot. And so there was that kind of back and forth. And so I had this tremendous amount of guilt for not reading these books. And so I've been realizing, I was like, you know what I'll do is instead of like reading arcs or reading things before they come out, I'll offer to authors on TikTok because that's where I saw a lot of authors like really peddling their stuff. I was like, I'm opening up my comment section, just put down your book and your author name that I can find you under, and I'll get to your book eventually. I can't guarantee when I'll get to it, but I'll get to it. Right. And so it got a lot more people than I thought it would. Like I was like, well, maybe like one or two people will like, hit me up on it.
Did not surprise me.
Yeah, it was like over 100 people like gave me book titles. So I was like, okay, well, that's a lot more than I thought. So I started writing down all the titles, and I'm starting a spreadsheet of authors, their books, and everything. And a lot of great questions came up because some people were like, well, if you're not interested in reading my book because of the genre or anything, then please don't. And it got me to think, because there are just some genres I just don't gravitate towards. Like I'm finding out that I am not a dark romance reader. It's just not in my bag.
What about horror and fantasy?
I love horror and fantasy, and I like pretty much like the things that I'm finding I don't like are so very small.
Dark romance.
But
okay.
It's really like dark romance and very specific types of dark romance. Like I don't like it when people aren't having a good time in romance books, and it's a whole thing. I'm actually planning a whole discussion based off this in a video to kind of explain it. But yeah, so I realized that there's genres that I'm not really going to be interested in. So one of my plans is when I get my spreadsheet done of all the authors and getting genres and everything out there, is to try and help both readers and writers kind of connect and be a middle point to, oh, you say you like this genre, well, there's this author that you may not have heard of, and doing that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Very nice. So we're going to look forward to Chrissy, book reviewer extraordinaire, bringing the TikTok game a little onto YouTube just to show us what's going on. Not that you have to duplicate, because we don't want to duplicate.
Yeah, no. Well, I do want to do like TikTok is great for like really quick content, but I do miss doing longer reviews because I've tried doing a few reviews on TikTok, and it's nice to get out small sound bites of it.
Yeah.
But you can't really get into tremendous detail. And like my reviews aren't very long anyway. They're like 10, sometimes 15 minutes. But I do like to get into some nuanced discussion about the books I'm reading. So
just a tip. the person who I've been watching who does hilarious bad book reviews is Tattooed Bibliophile. Do you follow her, Brittany?
I probably do.
She's
I'll
really funny.
keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, thank you all for joining our discussion with Chrissy from The Return Cart here on YouTube and Lost in a Book BRB on TikTok and Twitter. And we really enjoyed getting together to talk about Red Mars, but also talk about all the other stuff. So please follow us on our channels and, you know, maybe suggest an indie author book that she should read as a reviewer,
Yes.
or I don't know, tell me something to do.
I'm a big fantasy reader.
Yes. And I know a lot of
Historical
fantasy
romance.
authors. Yeah. Yeah. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank
We'll be
you.
with you again. I don't have any plans for future videos because I have fallen off the wagon, but hopefully we'll get back on soon. Actually,
Same.
no, Sunday I'm on Go Indie Now. So if you're on the Go Indie Now channel, we have like 5 or 6 authors doing author chat for Thankful theme. So that should be fun.
Nice. Very cool.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for letting me join you in this discussion.
Of course. This was super fun. It's really
Yes.
fun. So thanks everybody, and we'll talk to you again soon.
All right. See you guys.